G'day and welcome to Mark and Sam After Work. Today I want to do a video about helping improve everyone's ELR shooting, ELR to ULR. What am I talking about? Extreme long range or ultra long range shooting. And I suppose I'd have to bracket a little bit to where we're up to and what I mean by that. I've been through the fact that extreme long range shooting is, or ELR shooting is about changes for different calibers and that sort of stuff. So you can be talking about as little as 500 yards when you talk about a 22 long rifle, and you can be talking about, and I suppose it's the other end of the scale which I'd like to put some brackets on. And there is now shots that are going out further and further still, forward spotters and big targets and things that are going a lot further still. It's probably gone past what I would call practical ELR shooting. Now this is each their own and what they're doing. There's all sorts of achievements and goals that people want to set and go for, so I don't want to take anything away from that. And in our earlier target shooting systems, or not ours, but the world's earlier target shooting systems, targets got quite large for open sights at 800 yards and 1,000 yards and things like that. So quite big targets do that sort of stuff. All that stuff is its own competition, and it has all its merits and has its own bits and pieces. I would say the stuff I'm talking about when I'm trying to talk about ELR shooting, what it really comes down to, and the more we do, the more we understand, is what I'd probably call practical. It's sort of tactical in the type of style we use with rifles, but the actual style of shooting is more a practical side of things. We use a 24-inch target. We're really using the philosophy that targets don't get bigger as they go further away. And I'm not really talking about effective ranges and things like that. We're well past that sort of thing, but it still is a 24-inch target for us at whatever distance we're trying to do that. And that really comes into once you've gone, 2,000 meters, 2,000 yards, that sort of stuff is still a very long shot for the average punter. And that is in the extreme long range side of things. Probably once you get out to 2 miles, maybe a tad over it, but that neck of the woods, you're probably at the end of when practical ELR, or practically ultra long range, that's ultra long range for a lot of calibers, is where it stops. Once you go past that point, and certainly we have, and you've seen stuff out to 5,000 with us, but I really found out there is the accuracy, extreme accuracy still isn't enough. So I've got to the point where it is awesome to try and to challenge, and it's something that we still haven't done and would like to finish off and like to do that, but really we held down a ridiculously small group and still didn't manage to hit the 24-inch plate, which means we've really gone past practicality to where luck or something else is involved in getting it done. So really I'm sort of bracking it about the 2 miles, maybe a tad over, maybe 4,000 yards, but that's where it sort of stops in the way of practical stuff and it turns into something else. So that's the brackets where I'm talking about when I talk about ELR/ULR. The next bit I'm talking about is that most people will tell you that the equipment, the loading, the bullet, the software, all that sort of stuff is the most important thing to shooting ELR. I've heard many mentions about how accurate your powder's got to be able to get that right, to get your elevation right and all that sort of stuff. And I don't want to take away from that conversation because yes, it's important, but actually the most important thing, in my consideration, the more I've done it, the most important thing is learning to read those conditions. And it's probably more than just reading them, it's being able to interpret them. It's being almost able to predict them. Now that might sound a little bit like hocus pocus to some people, but I'll explain this a little bit. Yes, you need good data, you need good equipment. As for how good, there's various ways of skinning that cat. And the great big pile of money, great big pile of components still has a fundamental problem of the conditions change things around. And we're at the range, once you go to this sort of distance, then it can be the type of thing where a great big group, which is all over the place, can still hit a target, and a really small group that isn't quite got it can still miss a target. So I would always say in this sort of shooting, the group is the important thing. The hit is sometimes more by chance than by the accuracy of everything. But you have to take everything into context of what actually happened. But what I would lead into is that reading of the conditions. To a degree, the way we do it, and I don't want to tell people or preach people how to do things, but the way we do it is very specific to the fact that I make the decisions. Sam, my spotter, is certainly telling me what she can see me, and if she can see trends in things, then she will be passing that on. So the wind has changed, she's going to tell me that sort of stuff. But you won't hear Sam making a shot call, telling me where to shoot. So the wind callers that say, listen, hold here, hold there. There's a couple of reasons we do it our way. One is in particular that the only person that knows exactly what happened when that trigger broke to be able to make the call on exactly what happened when that bullet hit is the shooter. If the shooter does the perfect job every time and then is completely controlled by the shot caller, or the wind caller, whatever that job title is, then okay, that can work. But to me, a tiny little thing when I go to break that trigger, where my crosshair was exactly laying, how the rifle actually behaved is super important. So that's the way I do it, but there's another thing that's going on there. And that is that, as said, reading the conditions. So learning, I suppose there is that side of it, there is learning to read wind and what you're expecting from it. So that means looking at your landscape. No, the more you're familiar with the area, the easier it becomes. But the truth of it is those rules all apply no matter where you are on the globe. You'll start to see if the wind's coming across a hill and down through a valley, or the wind's coming around a bank of trees, or the wind's got a flat plane to push across to it, or if it's coming, from the ocean over to a cliff. And there's always going to be a logic to what wind is doing. It is a fluid. And it is not a constant thing by any means. It has ripples and currents and things inside there. And the more you look at it, the more you study landscapes and look at wind and look at trees and look at washing on the line and look at things, you'll see more of what's actually happening. That same interpreting of the wind is what you're going to use out there in the field. But a lot of people go to, when you make a normal wind call, that's the wind, I've got to dial it into my app, and then I dial it into the scope, and then we shoot, and it should hit the center. It sort of doesn't work that way. There's a little bit of that logic. There's a little bit of the wind is this, so I've got to dial in that amount. But with extreme long range shooting, you find that it actually is, there's multiple winds to start off with. You have winds at different height, you have winds at different levels, you have all sorts of things changing. So the likes of a cold bore shot or a first shot hit, once you're in real extreme long range, that is going to happen. Yes, you can stack the odds in your favour by being better at everything. So your skill, your equipment, your data, your everything, the way you set up can certainly stack the odds a little bit more in your favour, but you still have your first shots are going to be exploratory. They're going to go out there and find things, so then you have to work from there. So the truth of it is, even in the close stuff, which you've seen us at 2,000 metres where we've got cold bore hits, or one cold bore, one first shot, we've had some other shots, which was recently posted. I would still put a certain amount of luck attached to that, because you can't always, it isn't always what it seems to be. Especially when you're going over a mile in the way of a shot, the wind isn't always what it seems to be. So there is, I expect, exploratory. When it works, it's great, and we've shot out as far as 2,400 yards and made that happen. But I've also shot at a 12-inch plate at 600 yards across a valley and missed on my first shot, even with doing all the same technique, with the same sort of quality, probably a little less cartridge, so a little more wind attached to it. Or deflection because of the wind. It just wasn't quite as punching as hard. But I suppose what I'm trying to say is it's a very condition-based thing, but learning how to read them and then learning how to interpret them. So really, from my way of looking at it, is you wipe the first shot off as to, if it works, awesome, but really expect to be able to have to walk onto target. But even then, even that isn't the complicated bit. The complicated bit is that it will keep changing. Each shot will be a little varied because the conditions will generally, 99% of the time, I find that it'll change. Now, yes, it could be down to the group and how you're shooting and how you're loading, all that sort of stuff matters, but the truth of it is the conditions actually change. So what I've learned to do And it's the reason you see me shooting the ELR stuff, whereas Sam is a capable shooter without any question, but actually learning to predict what's going on is something that I have more skill at. I've done more of it, but it's a little bit more how my brain works. But I'll actually see a trend. And that's generally because the last 3 shots or the last 5 shots or the last 10 shots are all programmed in there. And what I'm looking for, especially in the more erratic conditions, is a pattern. So then I can make a call just as the trigger's going to break, that, and I do quite commonly say, okay, I've shot here and I've shot there and I've shot here and this is where it landed, this is where it landed, this is where I think the trend is and I'm going to shoot here. I'll hold down to the left corner or the bottom of the target and there's a hit. Now sometimes there's luck involved with that where, yeah, you hold your mouth in the right angle, it works. But really what I've tended to find is where I get those good groups from is by predicting what's actually coming on. A little bit of, like I said, might sound a little bit like hocus pocus, but the truth of it is when you're shooting extreme long range, your bullet is traveling sort of into the future. It's not really, of course, but what you see and what is when you break the trigger is not the same thing when the bullet gets the target. It's sent off on its way and it's traveling off out there, and we no longer have control. So it might be 2 seconds, it might be 5 seconds, it might be 10 seconds of where the bullet is actually traveling to, and that is forward of when you made the decision. That is in the future of when you made the decision to pull that trigger. So it is about, in one form or other, where ELR shooting is about predicting what those conditions are going to be. If they're very stable, they're less likely to change. But as said, I've found almost always they are varying. And I suppose what the crux of this story, that long complicated thing of what I'm trying to say to try and improve ELR shooting, is study your wind, study the weather. And that means all the time. That means every opportunity you can, be looking at what wind's doing, trying to understand things. Certainly in competitions or that sort of stuff, that's what the smart people are going to be doing. They're going to be doing as much as they can of watching other people shoot, watching other people's shots, watching where the dust flows off the hill, but also trying to make sense of the wind, which is the really important stuff, is at the highest point of the bullet's trajectory. That point there, generally the bullet has slowed down a fair bit. In ELR stuff, generally the bullet will have gone subsonic at that point. So it is traveling slower and it's up higher. The higher you go, the higher the wind is. For those that aren't aware, the slipstream's up there, so that means there's winds that are doing 300 to 400 miles an hour actually. It's not generally that fast, but there's some pretty high speed wind up there, and then there's layers of wind between our ground wind and the ground winds, and as you go up there's layers of winds which are sometimes doing completely different directions. The more you can sort of interpret that sort of stuff, read that sort of stuff, and it won't get any more complicated, but it really is a case of learn to read conditions, learn to try and see trends, to try and make sense of that. That is the key to getting better at ELR. And as I said, I don't want to take anything away from better loading, from better bullets, from better platforms, from better barrels, all that sort of stuff. And I suppose I would say better is a term I use, but I don't really like so much, because what is better? It's more efficient, or is it better to use, or is it cheaper, or is it blah, 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 blah. There's all those bits and pieces that go with it. But I don't want to take away from that, but I would say for ELR stuff and ULR stuff, ultra long range, reading conditions, learning to interpret, learning to look a little bit tiny window into the future is where the key is for being able to do that better than the next guy. All right, guys, that's my video for today. I hope that's some help, and thanks for checking in on us. We'll catch you next time.